Hey YouTube, I'm Vince White. I'm an employment attorney. Today we're talking about a mental health disability case out of Ohio, recently decided by the Sixth Circuit. I'll give you the quick rundown. We have a gym teacher at an Ohio school system. She's teaching middle school. She's out a couple days for like a snow event, snow days or something like that. And while she's out, she apparently has like an epiphany, a religious experience, and she comes back to school eager to tell everyone about her religious experience. And she tells them, hey, I had this religious experience, it was deeply religious, and now God speaks to me and tells me what to do, and I'm guided by God. Great. School district seems to be pretty chill with that. They tell her, listen, great, so happy for you. Remember, we don't preach to students here. It's actually important that as a teacher you not approach students about your faith. She does not agree. She does, in fact, begin to preach to students in person, via email, and via some rather lengthy Facebook messages. I think it was 12-page Facebook message to a student, right? I think we can all say, not thrilled to have a teacher writing massive Facebook messages to her students, right? So the school comes and says, hey, we think we need to get you a mental health evaluation. Sidebar, never, ever let your employer get you a mental health evaluation unless you're also getting your own. Very important, right? Our gym teacher makes the right call. She says, I want my own. I don't trust yours. I want my own. School, kudos to them, apparently says, sure. Your mental health evaluator and ours. Let's do both. Okay, so upshot is the school's mental health evaluator basically says, listen, just before I go on, both mental health evaluators came back with a mental disability diagnosis. Both. Hers and theirs. Now, the school said, listen, I don't believe she can do this job within the rules of the job anymore. I don't think it's going to be possible. That's kind of key because it goes to that reasonability standard for accommodation, right? If you cannot accommodate someone reasonably, then your duty to do so, it's exceeded, right? You're exceeded, specifically. Your duty is only to accommodate if it's reasonable, to grant a reasonable accommodation, not any accommodation, right? Now, essentially, and here's what the Sixth Circuit comes back with, and I'll read this because I think it's a quote from the court. An employer may not rightfully fire an employee for disability-related conduct that is not related to work performance and does not violate some workplace or societal rule. And that was a reference to a 1997 case. The court goes on. Rather, an employer should tolerate eccentric or unusual conduct caused by the employee's mental disability so long as the employee can satisfactorily perform the essential functions of his job. And that is the court. Now, the court also goes on to point out that there are some limits here. An employer may legitimately fire an employee for conduct, even conduct that occurs as a result of a disability, if that conduct disqualifies the employee from his or her job. In this instance, essentially not preaching to students was kind of like a requirement for public education. And the teacher expressly violated that rule. So it went to a place where they couldn't really accommodate anymore, according to the court. And that is now the finding, right? And this is not so surprising to me. I think most employment attorneys have always kind of operated as if this was the case, right? I'll give you an example, kind of a common example. Impulse control disabilities are many and varied. It's a spectrum, right? Tourette's, for example. Often Tourette's will be expressed as a number of tics, and sometimes shouting out, vulgar words. I think we can all agree, to some extent, sticks and stones. Like, we can all live with a couple of vulgar words if it means we're going to be accommodating somebody dealing with a mental health disability. I think we can tell people, like, yeah, sometimes this human says things that are shocking. It's a disability. We need to learn to live with this, right? Other impulse control disabilities can involve things like poor decision making about when to engage in violence, or poor decision making about when to engage in sexualized activity. Now, generally speaking, those are going to be harder to accommodate, right? Vulgar words are, sticks and stones. Nobody's breaking bones. If you have an impulse control disability that has you engage in aggressive physical activities, like taking a swing at your coworker, well, that's tougher. That's much tougher to accommodate, right? And I think that's the tension here. That's what the court essentially had to deal with. The court was saying, okay, you've got misconduct. The misconduct, we can all agree, flows from this mental health disability, but we don't think it's something this employer can live with. We don't think there's a way to accommodate here where this person can still do their job. That is really sad. It's sad that this gym teacher lost her job. I hope good things for her. I hope she lands on her feet, right? But I do think it's the correct decision. Because, the law calls for a reasonable accommodation. If you can't do the job at all in a way that it must be done, in a way that the rules require it be done, at that point, is there a reasonable accommodation that can be had? I don't know that we can say there is. And that's tough. That's tough. But I think it's worth discussing. I think it's worth knowing, right? Because people always attack our industry like, oh, they'll do anything for employees. They don't care what happens. Yeah, in my heart, employees come first, right? Yes, always. If you're a train conductor and your disability is narcolepsy, and we're sure you're always going to fall asleep because your narcolepsy is very tough on you, and that puts your passengers at risk, well, perhaps that's not the job for you. Perhaps there's not really an accommodation there. Although I could argue, well, if you don't work alone, I guess even then I'm kind of like, well, we can find a way, right? So maybe I am actually just employee-centric, but, there's certainly situations where I think, the accommodation would not be reasonable, and just embarrassing that I came up with an example where I still think maybe we could come up with something reasonable. Maybe the criticisms of me are correct. Like and subscribe. It helps me to help more people just like you. And comment down below. Can you think of any examples where people could not be accommodated in the workplace? A disability and a job that maybe the accommodation just couldn't work out? We can discuss below.